Hello and welcome to everybody. I do thank you so much to each and every one of you for taking the time out of your challenging, confusing, and often sad realities of working from home, caring for your loved ones, your JCC community, and your wider community. I hope this coming hour will be somewhat of a respite and even power your batteries as you continue with the week ahead. Just a few technicalities before we begin. We're a huge crowd, that's wonderful. So I've muted everybody. Please make sure you stay muted. That's the little red line that goes through the microphone, probably on the bottom left-hand side of your screen, or if you're calling in by phone, it's often on the top right-hand side of your screen. We're making a recording of this Zoom, and we will send it to you. It will be available in a YouTube format so that you can share with your members on social media, on your websites, etc. After Adina's presentation, there will be time for questions. Again, in order to manage this large number, please write your questions in the chat box. There's a chat icon on the bottom of the screen. If you're unable to sort of find that, you can certainly send me an email, and my email address, I sent you the invitation to the Zoom. It's s.sless@jcca.org. So that's the technicalities out of the way. I'm so grateful to Adina Sussman for agreeing to present to us on Israel's culinary scene, and for the number of Zoom dress rehearsals that we have had up until this evening. I know she's a lot happier in the kitchen than in front of the Zoom, and I thank her for meeting the challenge. The culinary arts is a wonderful lens with which to introduce people to the flavors and culture of Israel. Many of you know Adina from her visits to your JCC during Book Week and from her most recent cookbook, Sababa, Fresh and Sunny Flavors from My Israeli Kitchen. She's traveled wildly, and I know that many of you are very excited to be seeing her again. She's a prolific writer, recipe and product developer, and consultant based in Tel Aviv. One of her favorite pastimes, of course, is wandering the streets of the Carmel market, which is sadly closed now because of the coronavirus. I really want to say a huge thanks to you, Adina, for giving us your time and sharing with us your passion. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone from Tel Aviv. It's so good to be here and to connect with all of you. I feel very connected to the JCC. I grew up going to the JCC in Palo Alto, California. And actually, it just occurred to me recently that one of my first opportunities when I transitioned into the culinary world a little bit late in my career was I was an instructor at the JCC Culinary Arts Center on the Upper West Side. And that is really the place that I got a lot of my chops and a lot of my instructional experience and learned how to convey my love and passion for cooking to other people in a Jewish context. And I think that JCCs are more important than ever, and I want to thank all of you who hosted me in the fall on my Sababa tour, and those of you who were meant to host me in the spring or summer, but hopefully we'll be rescheduling that. So I'm going to get right into the presentation. I know you guys are all at home, and I just wanted to thank you for one more thing, giving me the opportunity to get dressed and find my makeup bag for the first time in 2.5 weeks. Couldn't actually find it, but it was fun making the effort. So where is Israeli food stand today? I think I would ask for a show of hands how many of you have been to Israel in the past 30 years, 20 years, 10 years, and 5 years, because so much has changed in that time period. I would say that, when I grew up coming to Israel, Israel was known for hummus, falafel, and shawarma. And you would ask people how their trip was to Israel, and they would say, my trip was amazing. And then you would ask them, how is the food? And they would say, it was okay, but there was a lot of hummus. People would come home from Israel never wanting to eat Israeli food again, which is a very ironic thing, because now when people come to Israel, they're so excited by the variety and the depth and breadth of Israeli food. And we all see how Israeli food has gone from being a trend to being part of the culinary canon in the United States. I mean, who would have thought that 10 years ago you could get a shakshuka kit in Trader Joe's? I mean, this is something that is shocking to me, and I think to a lot of people. A lot of people are still learning what these foods are, but I thought I would put them in a little bit more of a culinary context and explain to you why I think Israeli food is doing what it's doing right now. When I started writing about Israeli food 20 years ago, I think it was really just starting to bubble up and become something beyond the expected. What happened was Israel became a much more open society. The internet opened up the world. Israeli media opened up. Cable television happened. People were watching food television from all over the world. Israel became a wealthy nation of people working in high tech, highly educated, traveling around the world, eating in Michelin star restaurants. Chefs were going all over the world and working in amazing places. And they were all of a sudden watching that people in other countries were taking pride in what they were cooking that was right under their noses. It used to be when you came to Israel and you had to entertain someone, you would take them to a French restaurant, an Italian restaurant, an Argentinian steakhouse. And that was the mark of a great chef in Israel, that they could cook somebody else's cuisine. And I think what happened is all of a sudden these young chefs and travelers around the world were thinking, hey, wait a minute, we've got incredible olive oil. We've got amazing cheeses. We have the best produce in the world. The wine scene is burgeoning. Everything is happening right under our noses. How can we go back and channel this and make it into something new and create a new culinary language in Israel? And all of a sudden you started seeing people creating dishes that maybe were a little bit different than what was expected. So you would see a fish falafel, for instance, or you would see a shakshuka that was made with, merguez sausage as opposed to just eggs. Shakshuka is a great example of a dish that has really conquered the world. I think, for better or for worse, a lot of people don't even realize that shakshuka is Israeli. You can get it at every brunch menu. You see it in Bon Appetit magazine and Food and Wine, and everywhere there's a recipe for shakshuka, or you can get it, at a restaurant. Shakshuka started out as a Tunisian, North African roots dish that workers would stuff into a pita and eat to sort of fill themselves up in the morning. It used to be that the yolk was cooked all the way through until it was really solid, kind of like a hard-boiled egg, sort of suspended in sauce, and you could get it almost like on a steam table, which you can still do in some hotels. It was like a plowman's breakfast because, Israel was an agrarian culture where people were working on kibbutz, and that culture of working with your hands and hard labor and eating to sustain yourself is really something that I think did inform a lot of where Israeli food started and where it has ended up today. Another great example of that is the pita itself. So used to be, remember when you would eat a pita sandwich, you would sort of get the sandwich and it was sort of a speed contest because you were waiting for the pita to fall apart and for everything that was in the pita to kind of drip all over down your chin and onto your clothes. So in 2011, Eyal Shani, who's a very famous chef in Israel, who some of you may be familiar with, opened the first restaurant called Miznon in Tel Aviv. And while now it seems very understandable and expected that there would be a restaurant where it focused on amazing, delicious things stuffed into a pita, when he opened that in 2011, it was really groundbreaking. He not only reinvented what went into the pita, but he reinvented the pita itself. The pita became something almost more akin to a sourdough bread. It was let to rise for a long time and develop flavor, and it was thick, and it was made with a special flour so that it had a stretchy, fluffy, pillowy texture that when it was steamed, it would become this delicious delicacy. And then he stuffed it with things like the now ubiquitous roasted cauliflower that we've all made or seen in a restaurant that at the time, 10 years ago, even Israelis had never heard of. What was this? Taking in a whole primal vegetable and just throwing it and roasting it in the oven, dropping it into a pita and considering that a meal, that was really revolutionary. And Eyal Shani has an interesting theory that when you put food into a pita, usually you put food onto a plate and both the food and the plate sort of die immediately. When you put food into a pita, both the food and the pita take on different character. The pita absorbs the sauce of the food. The food becomes a little bit drier. The two interact in different and unique ways. And now, when you go all over Israel, you'll see these incredible little joints, holes in the wall that look very prosaic and basic, that are really focused on creating amazing fillings to put inside a pita. So those are just two really simple examples of what is going on in the Israeli food revolution here. And I thought that I would take it back a little bit to the Carmel market where I live and work, and to tell you a little bit about my experience with Israeli cuisine and how I sort of found myself in Israel and how I developed my own philosophy on Israeli food and how I share it with people like you and your communities at JCCs around the country. I was almost born in Israel. My parents lived here for a year before I was born, and my mother got on one of the last planes that she was allowed to fly when she was 7 months pregnant. I was born in New Haven, Connecticut, but we came here on every family vacation. There was no Paris, there was no Yosemite. It was always Israel, Israel, Israel. And I remember the first falafel that I tasted when I was 9. And I drank so much carrot juice on a month that we spent in Israel when I was 9 that my fingernails turned orange, and it took a year for them to grow out and for them to become sort of a regular color again. And over time, I spent a gap year in Israel, and I lived in Israel for 5 years after college. And that was my first experience with green market cooking. You know, I was living in Jerusalem. The Machane Yehuda market was alive and kicking, and I was used to going to the supermarket to pick up all of the ingredients that we would use to cook for Shabbat and during the week. And all of a sudden, I found myself in a culture where I would go and ask for an avocado, and the vendor would look at me like I was crazy because avocados were a seasonal fruit. You know, and in the United States, you can get avocados or limes or mangoes or anything you want whenever you want. And it was my first education in the fact that produce is really seasonal, and if it's not local, then it's not eaten. You know, Israel is not a place where they fly in strawberries from Chile and they fly in mangoes from Mexico. You know, it's very seasonal, and some of the seasons are very short, and that was a great lesson for me. And I remember going back to New York when I lived there for about 20 years and sort of keeping that in the back of my mind all the time as my food career developed. I'd say Israeli food and my food career kind of ascended at the same time. And I found myself writing more and more about what was happening here, all the incredible wines that were being made, all of the amazing restaurants that were opening, all the people who were suddenly traveling to Israel for the food. And one of the things that they were doing was going to the markets. So why don't we click on to slide 2. Slide 2 is a picture of the Carmel market as it used to look. Sarah should be clicking on there in a second. But I met my now husband, Jay, about 5.5 years ago, and I agreed to move to Israel. And one of the conditions was that our apartment would be somewhere near the Carmel market in Tel Aviv. And I think he knew that instinctively, that by putting me right near a food market and giving me the opportunity to interact with a food culture, that my absorption into Israel would be all the much easier. And he was totally right. From the day that I got to Israel, I just felt so at home in Shuk Carmel. I don't know how many of you have been there, but you know, it's not exactly your platonic ideal of a European market with, you know, polished glass awnings and brass edges and people in really sharp coats. You know, it's loud, it's smoky, there are birds flying around, it's near the beach, you know, there's a breeze flying, it can be really hot. If it rains, you're ankle deep in water in a couple of minutes, but it's really real. It's a place that people go to buy produce, to buy meat, to talk to the vendors. And the Carmel market started in about 1920, 25. As many of you know, Tel Aviv, a very new city, only really modern Tel Aviv was only founded in 1909, very close to where I live now, near where Rothschild Boulevard is. And these people who lived there needed food, and there were Yemenite Jews who were living not far away in what is now the Yemenite Quarter, who saw an opportunity and rolled 3-legged carts. If you click through some of the pictures, Sarah, to 2 and 3, you can show people some of the pictures of what the market looked like in the early days. If you can't see it, you guys, there are some pictures in my book, or you can go online. Oh, you are seeing it. Okay, great. So if you look at picture 3, you'll see people just with simple wooden carts who would sell eggs or fruit. You know, Carmel Market is on Carmel Street, and that street stretches all the way down to the beach. And people very quickly became accustomed to going there to find all the food that they needed at good prices. And the market was an Arab-Jewish coexistence story, although not a very happy one. As Israeli statehood became more and more of a reality, there was more tension between the Arab and Jewish vendors in the shuk. The Jewish vendors were closer to the top, and the Arabs were closer down to the bottom, which technically was closer to Jaffa. And when the War of Independence broke out, there's a mosque that still operates that's about 200 yards from my house, and there was sniper fire from the mosque into the shuk. And it was a point of hand-to-hand combat between Arabs and Jews. And when Israel won the War of Independence, the Arabs either fled or were ejected, depending on who you asked, from that area, and the shuk became a completely Jewish-owned enterprise. If you click on slides 4 and 5, you can just see some old pictures of what the shuk looked like. And, Israelis became very used to going outside and buying their food. If you click to slide 17 and slide 15, just to give you a sense of how important the market is in our lives, when my husband and Jay and I got married in Tel Aviv about 3 years ago, we took our wedding photos in Shuk HaKarmel in our wedding finery. We walked through the shuk and we interacted with our favorite vendors, and it was just an incredible experience. I thought I would tell you about a few of the people in the market, just to give you a sense of what a multicultural place it is. If you click on slide 22, for instance, you'll see my friend Alam Gidi, who is an Eritrean. He's one of 60,000 asylum seekers who's trying to build a life in Israel. And he works at a store that sells Asian produce and products for all of the foreign workers and asylum seekers who live in Israel, who number close to 100,000 people. And they've really influenced the local cuisine. You know, I can go there and buy green papayas for my papaya salad, or lemongrass, or fresh turmeric, and I can get those things in a much easier way than I could in New York City, which is sort of the culinary capital of the world. So I love that I live in the Carmel market. If you go to slide 23, you'll see my friends, the Amrani brothers, on the right. They're third generation shuk vendors, and their name is Amrani. So a lot of people, when they're walking through the shuk, they'll spot me, a fellow American, and they'll ask where the Armani spice shop is, and I always correct them and tell them it's the Amrani spice shop. Their grandfather used to spread out thousands of red peppers and dry them and grind them for paprika. Obviously, they don't do that anymore, but they have one of the most respected spice shops in the shuk. This is in their storeroom that you see. And if you look on the left, you'll see hanging on the wall some beautiful sifters that their great-grandmother created using wood and the sinews of animals to create the sifting mechanism. They use it to sort stones from beans and rice and different things. They don't use them anymore, but they keep them there sort of as a keepsake and a memory of their heritage. Now, the Amranis all have children, but I felt like it was my duty to capture the shuk in a really specific place and time, because, you know, their sons, half of their children live in the United States. Some of them are high-tech executives, college professors, and professionals, and their kids don't want to take over their spice shop in the shuk. So we really might be at the end of an era of these people who are carrying on businesses from generation to generation. If you go to 24, just a little tip for you guys, if you're ever buying spices in the shuk, it doesn't look as romantic as those giant cones and piles of spices that you see in the shuk, but always buy your spices from closed containers. You, especially with what's going on today, I mean, you want to make sure that your spices are sealed and sealed off from humidity and cigarette smoke. I mean, I think a good quarter of my grapes that I buy in the shuk have a nice dusting of ash on them when I take them home and I have to wash them off. This is how you want to buy your spices, and they take a lot of pride in keeping their spices sealed in these little containers here. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about some of the elemental ingredients in Israeli cuisine and how they sort of express the multiculturalism of Israeli food today. One of the things that people love about eating in Israel is you'll go to a restaurant and you'll have something that contains, if you want to click on slide 8, you'll see here, this is a picture from Sababa of a variety of condiments that I have in the front of the book. And what I try to share with people in Sababa is that by making all these condiments, you're sort of waving the flag for a lot of the different ethnic groups and denominations that have contributed to Israeli cuisine and Israeli life, and also that they're going to give you just tons of options in the kitchen. You make a few of these condiments or buy them. As I mentioned, you can buy schug and amba, which is a condiment that I'll talk about in a minute, in Trader Joe's or in Whole Foods, or order them easily on Amazon. So I thought I would talk about a few of these condiments just to give you a sense of where they come from. So shlug, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of. It's a green hot sauce, or red, that's made with peppers and lemon and garlic and sometimes a little bit of cardamom or coriander or cumin. And it's typically used to break up the richness of a Yemenite soup. It's a Yemenite hot sauce that has sort of captured the imagination of Israelis. It's sort of like the sriracha or the Tabasco of Israel. You'll find it in many restaurants. You'll find it in every supermarket for people to purchase. But one of the things that I love about Israeli food is that as a culinary outsider in a culture, I was able to interpret the ingredients in different ways in Sababa and show people, including some Israelis, different ways to use things that are right under their noses. The thing that I hate the most is making or buying a condiment or an ingredient and then having it either pass its expiration date or go to waste. So if you go to slide 13, you'll see that rather than just plopping some shlug in my Yemenite soup, I marinate beautiful lamb chops in a marinade of mint and shlug, and I grill some lemons and onions, and I serve it as an amazing sort of barbecue grill dish. And then the same goes for the harissa on slide 8. Harissa is a Tunisian or Moroccan hot sauce made with peppers. It's typically stirred into shakshuka or put on sandwiches, a Tunisian sandwich, which is kind of like a Middle Eastern niçoise sandwich. But one of the most popular recipes from Sababa is the harissa honey chicken in slide 12, where I took the harissa and I mixed it with honey, and I cooked chicken thighs with whatever fresh fruit was in season and some onion wedges, and made it a really delicious Shabbat dish that people can cook really easily. Then in the back, we've got preserved lemons and preserved lemon paste. On the right, there's a overnight preserved lemon paste. One of the things I love is how innovative Israeli chefs are these days. My friend Jonathan Borowitz, who's the chef of M25, which is a steakhouse right near the house, which unfortunately is closed right now. I was eating there a lot, and he kept putting this little tray of condiments on the table, and I was like, what is this amazing preserved lemon? And he said that he didn't have the patience to cure lemons for 3 months in the sun with the salt. So he sliced the lemons really thin, cured them overnight with some jalapenos and garlic and some canola oil and salt, and then he blitzed it in a food processor to make this sort of creamy, chunky, amazing, zesty, fresh lemon condiment. And anyone who tastes it and makes a jar of it just finds a million uses for it. And one of them is, in slide 10, there's arayas, is a very popular dish in Israel now. It's a lamb burger stuffed into a pita and grilled brushed with a lot of olive oil so that both the lamb cooks and the pita gets nice and crispy. But because Israeli food is so vegetable forward, and I think Israelis really have a reverence for fresh vegetables, I decided to make my arayas with mushrooms. So it looks like a burger, but it's actually made with mushrooms mixed with all of the expected burger herbs and spices and different things and grilled together. And that is served with that amazing lemon condiment. So those are just a few examples of how I approach Israeli food and how I tend to see the ingredients. And one of the things that was really interesting for me in writing Sababa was, here I was, an American living in the Carmel market. When I got my book contract, I had been working with a woman named Chrissy Teigen, who's a supermodel who is married to the singer John Legend, and she has 28 million Instagram followers. And we wrote a couple of New York Times bestselling cookbooks together. And we had a break, and I wrote my book proposal, and all of a sudden my book proposal sold, and I was like, oh, what am I going to contribute to this conversation is about Israeli food that has been going on now for the better part of a decade. People like Michael Solomonov and Yotam Ottolenghi and Einat Admoni and Alon Shaya have all written these amazing books all about Israeli food, and they've discovered all of the different cultural pathways. They've cooked with the grandmas. They've done all those things. What can I say that's going to add something unique to this conversation? And what I realized was that of all of these people, I was the only one who was actually living in Israel and living in the market and shopping every day and cooking from the ingredients in situ. And also, these are all people who came from a professional chef's background, and I have such reverence and respect for them. Michael is a very dear friend of mine. He wrote the foreword for my book. As a food journalist, I've written about all of them and cooked with many of them, and I really wanted to respect what they had done, but really sort of chart my own course. And I realized that instead of feeling like I had to represent every single ethnicity in Israel and show everyone abroad every single thing from every single culture, the best story that I could tell would be the one that would be the most narrow and the most personal. And that was the story of a woman who fell in love with a guy who had been living in Israel for 35 years and lived in the Shuk Carmel, and what it was like to shop and cook there every day, and how to make weeknight food that really celebrates the essence of Israeli cuisine in an authentic but original way. And that's what I tried to do, and also to educate people about some of the basic ingredients in Israel and what you should know if you want to cook Israeli food. So a good example is slide 6. If you look there, you'll see chickpeas. So on your left, there's a smaller chickpea, and on your right, there's a larger one. So when I first got to Israel and I went to the shuk and asked for chickpeas, they said chickpeas for hummus or chickpeas for salad. And I was super confused. And, one of the things I decided really early was that I wasn't going to try and, act smarter than I was, just always in a place of learning when it comes to food. I said, what is the difference? And they explained to me that one of the reasons that hummus is so delicious at Israeli hummusiyot or restaurants is because they use the chickpeas on the left, which are called hadas chickpeas, which are really small chickpeas that have really thinner skins and cook up really quick and creamy. And they're imported from Bulgaria. And Israel is one of the largest consumers of this variety of chickpeas in the world. Now, we all have to cook in the United States with the garbanzo or chickpea variety on the right. And in Israel, those are typically used, they're cooked until they're a little bit more al dente, and they're used like in salads or in cold preparations, or, if someone's going to throw them into a soup or a stew and they want them to stay firmer, they're going to use the chickpeas. So the next time you're in Israel, if you want to bring something home for someone that's kind of like an insider culinary ingredient, ask for the hadas chickpeas. And especially if you bring them to an Israeli who likes to make hummus, they're going to love you forever. Another example is slide 7 is a baladi eggplant. I'm sure some of you are familiar with the term baladi. Baladi is an Arabic term for rustic or heirloom or country-like or sort of original. Peasanty is a little patronizing. So I would say rustic. And so baladi vegetables have become the prized vegetables of Israel. The smaller, the cucumber. These are the eggplants that I say have little tushies on them. And if you go into the shuk and see them, you see they have these little ridges on the bottom. And these are the if you remember in the late 90s, people started just grilling a beautiful eggplant and spreading it open and drizzling tahina on top of it and olive oil and a few cooked chickpeas. These were the eggplants that they used because they're super meaty and heavy for their size, and they don't have a lot of seeds, and they're really creamy and delicious. So these are baladi eggplants. Unfortunately, these aren't really available to American cooks, but it's fun to see the ingredients in the market in Israel and to know what they are, and to understand also just how important Arab and Palestinian food has been to the contribution it has had to Israeli cuisine. One of the things I love about Shuk Carmel is, on Muslim holidays like Eid or Iftar or Ramadan, the shuk is half empty. Between all the vendors who work there or manage shops and all the people who deliver food who are Muslim, they're out observing their holidays. And, you can often go through life in Israel without interacting with Arabs and Muslims in a meaningful way on a daily basis. And one of the things I really like about living in the shuk is that it's a good reminder for me about the different cultures and the different holidays and the cadence of life for different people. Alam, who I showed you, the Eritrean guy in the shop, he showed up one day with a black charcoal cross on his forehead. And, Easter had happened 2 weeks ago, but he informed me that it was Eritrean Easter. If I didn't live near the shuk, I would have never known that. And that's one of the things I really value about my life in the market, interacting with people and talking to them. And, there's a form of sort of commercial coexistence that happens in the shuk that doesn't get talked about a lot. It's not hyped up. It's just very quotidian. It happens every day. And I think another example of that is tahina. Some of you know that I wrote an entire cookbook about tahina in 2016. If you go to slide 20, you'll see what I do with tahina. So I took the basic tahina sauce, which is a, emulsification of sesame paste and ice water and lemon juice and a little garlic. And I decided to jazz it up and make a display, a multicolored display of tahina that you could put on your table and just really wow people. So the bottom is the plain, the middle on the right is a beet tahina, and the one on the top is all different kinds of herbs. A lot of people joke that like they sort of like have to come home and hide their like clothing purchases from their spouse. I need to hide all my extra herbs that I buy because he just mocks me incessantly. Like, what are you going to do with 3 bunches of parsley and 2 bunches of chives and 2 bunches of dill? And I say, oh, you want to see? And like I feel like it's a challenge. That's how the green tahina came about. And the yellow one is made with fresh turmeric, which gives it a beautiful color and kind of a dusky flavor. And probably my favorite on the left, on the bottom, is what I call my charcoal gray tahina. What I do is I take the eggplant skins from the eggplants that I grill for baba ganoush, and I blend it with the tahina, and it gives it a smoky, slightly eggplanty flavor and this beautiful gray color. And I talk about tahina specifically a lot in the book because I feel like it's one of those ingredients that's become a real ambassador for Israeli cuisine all over the world, to the point where people are now seeking out these cult brands of tahina like Har Bracha and Al Arz and throwing the names around sort of like, Beaujolais Nouveau or Chateauneuf du Pape. It's like you have to use the Al Arz tahina or you're not using the best tahina that there is. I will say that the worst tahina in the Israeli market is better than most tahinas that you're going to get in the United States until recently. And one of the things I love about tahina is, as I mentioned, it's another example of, tens of thousands of Israelis buy a jar of tahina every day that's been manufactured by Palestinians and Arabs. And they're all seeking out those brands and prizing those tahinas. And it just happens. It's not, those are the things you don't get the headlines with what's going on in Israel and with coexistence, and I love that. I use tahina in a lot of different ways. In slide 21, there's a popsicle on the left with a yogurt popsicle with a fig exposed, and then I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, I loved Magic Shell, which was that really junky chocolate sauce with oil in it that when you poured it on the ice cream, it turned into a hard shell. So I made a natural Magic Shell with coconut oil and tahina that when you dip a popsicle into it or spread it on, or pour it on ice cream, it turns into this magnificent little tahina shell. And then on the right are the tahina glazed carrots that were featured in the New York Times. Several recipes from Sababa have been published in the New York Times, which has been just an incredible honor for me and has really given Sababa a wider audience. And I've been just incredibly gratified by the response to the book. And also something that's been really interesting for me is I really wrote this book for American cooks, and I really didn't think that Israeli food media or Israelis would be interested in cooking from my book, because what could I possibly have to teach to Israelis about the book? But my photo shoots for Sababa were sort of like a proving ground for my ideas. Like my whole staff was Israeli, and I worked with Dan Peretz, who's Israel's top food photographer. The photography was a huge part of my book, and it was really important for me to work with an all-Israeli team, because even though I was a citizen of Israel already and had been living here, I really felt like an Israeli creative team could lend that sort of granular Israeliness that I probably maybe will never have, even if I've lived here for 40 years. And, I would say, okay, today we're going to be making the tahina caramel tart. And they would sort of shift uncomfortably and be like, okay, but we're not going to eat that, and then I would put out this beautiful glistening caramel tart made with butter and cream and tahina and salted caramel and in a chocolate shortbread crust with tahina, and then the whole cake would be gone in a minute. And I'd be like, okay, if the whole Israeli staff is going to eat this, then I know that I've got a winner. And eventually a lot of Israeli publications wrote about Sababa and published recipes from it, and I've been surprised at how many Israelis have purchased the book. And it makes me really proud that I think it's really just a story about Aliyah and how, people from the United States can contribute to Israeli culture in ways that might be unexpected. And whenever someone is interested in working in food in Israel, I'm always more than happy to meet with them. I try and take people to the shuk and show them what my life is like so they can see how I interact not only with Israeli food, but with Israel through food, and how, in education about Israel can come in a million different ways. And I think that food is one of the most effective ways to excite people about Israel. I know that the Mirage JCC in Irvine just built a beautiful kitchen, and they have an Israeli chef there teaching classes, and it's really drawing a lot of people. I do some classes in my home here, and I just think that food is a non-political, non-religious, unifying subject, and it's obviously delicious and super appealing to everybody. And it's just been my honor to contribute to the culinary world, both in Israel and the United States, and to sort of do my form of hasbara for Israel in ways other than what might be expected. So that's a little bit about Israeli food and how I interact with it. And I thought I would open it up to some questions, or if there's anything else you'd like me to talk about, I'm happy to address specific questions.
So Adina, while people are maybe writing some questions, I want you to know that in the chat, it was like, I'm hungry. This is great. I like the purple and the yellow, and they're all these very cute little chats. One question that came in already, and I don't want to make a mistake, was the name of the small chickpea that should be used for hummus.
So those are called hadas chickpeas.
Okay, so that's what I had written in. I just wanted to double check.
Okay. I've heard that some restaurants can get them now to make hummus, and that you can source them maybe at some Middle Eastern markets. They're still hard to find, but I do predict that within a couple of years they'll become more readily available. And most of the things in sababa, like for instance, we didn't talk about all the spice blends like za'atar, which I think is another one that's kind of conquered the world. It's this blend of sesame seeds and biblical era hyssop and sumac and salt. Za'atar is a blend of spices, not just one spice. Like a lot of foods that have an Arabic name, hummus is both the name of the ingredient and the dish that it goes into. Za'atar is the name of the leaf, and it's the name of the blend. But I specifically put recipes for all of these things in the book. You can make za'atar quite easily. If you can't find za'atar leaves, you can use oregano. And my mother was an incredible, very simple home-style cook of blessed memory, and she taught me all kinds of amazing tricks. And the microwave was a big part of my upbringing in 1970s California. And one thing that I wouldn't say I learned directly from her, but I realized that you could dry fresh herbs in 90 seconds in the microwave. So I dry grated lemon zest in the microwave. I take oregano leaves and dry them for my za'atar. You can make za'atar in 5 minutes if you just find some fresh oregano and mix it with all the spices you have in the house. The same goes for baharat, which is a beautiful blend of warm spices and pepper that is really connected to the Levantine kitchen, which is all those countries that border Israel on the north, Syria, Lebanon, a little bit of Turkey, that use all those warm spices in savory preparations like stuffed peppers and grape leaves and in meats. I use my baharat in a coffee cake that I grew up eating sour cream coffee cake, but here I use labneh. So I make a labneh coffee cake, and instead of having a streusel with flour, I make a streusel with chalva and toasted walnuts and baharat and brown sugar, and I layer that between the layers of the cake batter. And just the idea is that my recipes are suggestions and inspiration. I want you all to feel liberated to take these ingredients and run with them and do the things that excite you and figure out the ways to make them your own and use them in ways that are delicious to you.
So we have 3 questions at the moment. Is your cookbook Sababa available for purchase through Amazon?
Yes, my cookbook is available on Amazon. It's been a bestseller in the Middle Eastern, kosher, and Jewish holiday cooking categories for the first 3 or 4 months. It was the #1 book in all those categories, which was amazing. It's the best price you'll find for the book is on Amazon. It's like $23 right now, and it lists for $35, so that's a great place to buy it. I also really do like to support independent bookstores, so most bookstores have Sababa, or will get it for you if you ask for it, but yes, it's available. I am actually going to be posting because of the coronavirus and so many people cooking at home. First of all, please all follow me on Instagram. I post all kinds of recipe instructional videos. I put all kinds of tips up there. You can see what I'm up to. Usually you'll see me walking through the shuk. My most recent post was a bit of an elegy to the closed shuk, but you can definitely buy the book on Amazon. And I'm going to be posting 5 free recipes tomorrow on my website that my publisher has agreed to release, just because so many people are cooking from home and we're all looking for inspiration and distraction and nourishment of all kinds right now.
So another question we have here is, will we be able to look at some of the other pictures on the PowerPoint?
Sure, please feel free to just scroll through and I can.
Okay, so I'm going to scroll through and you're going to tell me to stop.
Yeah. Why don't you go back to number 1, actually?
Okay. And somebody asked also, which you might want to refer to as we're going through, do we know of any interactive online tour of the shuk that they could?
It doesn't exist yet, but I'm working on something along those lines.
Wow. Okay. So
an app,
that's how we started.
A shuk app that you'll be able to download and use as you go through the shuk to navigate and to know what to buy and where to eat and all the insider gossip about the vendors and just the history, everything about the shuk.
Great. Thank you. So I'm just going through the ones that we've actually seen, these ones.
Yeah. So number 1, I mean, this was actually a candidate for the cover of Sababa. Citrus to me is such an important part of life in Israel. And I think one of the reasons that Israeli food is so universal and universally loved is because the flavors are exotic yet familiar. So, spiciness comes from just plain old green hot chilies and red chilies, and acidity comes from lemons, which is something that every culture has and loves, And right now we're in the height of citrus season in Israel, or just getting to the end of it. And, for me, this sunshine in this picture and these hard shadows really speak to sort of those months in Israel where there's just always that bright light and you're eating this delicious juicy fruit. And, it just doing that in the dead of winter in Chicago can sort of transport you to Israel as much as it can by being here. So that's why I put that picture. Picture 9. This is a good opportunity to talk about amba. I'm not sure you've all had amba or are familiar with it, but amba is that yellow kind of viscous condiment that's usually in a squeeze bottle that you can find on pretty much every shawarma or falafel or sabich stand in Israel. And amba is a pickled savory mango condiment. Now, how did this get to Israel? It sounds like something from India. And if you thought so, you would be right, because as we all know, Jewish people, for business reasons or because of persecution, found themselves picking themselves up and moving to other places over the world throughout history. So there was a group of Iraqi Jews who moved to Bombay. They were known as the Baghdadi Jews. They lived there for quite a while, and they really became enamored of the local food and a lot of the condiments. And savory pickles made from fruit like unripe mangoes are very popular in India. So they brought that idea back with them to Iraq and sort of refined it to in India, a savory mango pickle is chunky and is used as a condiment alongside food. So they made it more a liquidy affair. It's made with unripe mangoes. And they brought it with them to Israel. And in the 1950s, a lot of Iraqi Jews opened sabich stands. Sabich is the sandwich of fried eggplant and potato and hard-boiled egg and salad in a pita. And amba was squeezed on it. So I love amba. There's a recipe for amba in the book. And actually, Tejal Rao wrote about the amba. She wrote a column about it in the New York Times Tea magazine, which was, again, shocking. Again, just I think more about the interest in Israeli food than about sababa necessarily. But, if you make a batch of amba, what are you going to do with it? There's only so much falafel you can eat. So I one day was home and my stepson, who was vegetarian at the time, was hungry and I had some tofu around. So I made a sort of a coconut curry, but instead of putting curry paste in it, I used amba instead. and it came out amazing. And it's a recipe that a lot of vegetarians are really responding to. And again, it was just because I have a lot of technical experience creating recipes. I've developed thousands of recipes for cookbooks and sort of as a recipe Cyrano for other chefs and for my own articles and TV, all kinds of stuff. Like I see the challenges in ingredients, and it excites me to find different ways to use them. So this is a great example of that, like a coconut amba curry with tofu. You could easily substitute in, pargio to dark meat chicken or meat or salmon or whatever it is that you want to. Let's see what else. So number 14, I think, is a good, a few people I've seen posting this recently during their Corona cooking. So I talked about that overnight preserved lemon paste. So I decided to sort of mix my passion for Italian cooking and Israeli cooking, and I made a bucatini pasta where I took a lot of that lemon paste and I caramelized it in a pan with some garlic, and then I boiled some pasta and tossed it in with the pasta water, and then I added some really good quality Italian tuna, some fresh peas, some chilies, some Moroccan cured olives, and then put a ton of Parmigiano Reggiano cheese on top. So it's kind of like a Italian, the Middle Eastern hybrid dish. And, it's just really fresh and light. And there are quite a few pasta dishes in the book. There's another pasta dish that is like a pappardelle with roasted tomatoes that was featured in People magazine. The roasted tomatoes from the book to me seemed so obvious because I make them we call the cherry tomatoes in Israel. They're so delicious. We call them our daily kilo. There are just so many delicious tomatoes in this country and we eat them so often. But sometimes I'll find a few that are kind of, heading south. So I'll just throw them onto a sheet pan with some olive oil and salt and roast them in the oven at about 400 degrees. And then one night I was just looking for something to make for dinner. So I made like a creamy sauce with labneh bound with a little bit of cream and all the roasted cherry tomatoes and some cumin and a little bit of chili flakes and tossed it with pasta. So just an example of, having these base ingredients around. Like to me, like a Tupperware full of roasted cherry tomatoes is going to be such a great, jumping off point for so many dishes, either for a family dinner or for entertaining. So say, in Israel, people are constantly stopping by our house. My joke after living in New York for 20 years is that in New York, spontaneity is scheduled in 15-minute increments, like 3 months in advance. Like, oh, let's have a spontaneous coffee, next year. In Israel, people are just constantly knocking on the door, climbing up the stairs. Maybe they have an inkling that there's some food around, but I always need to have things ready to serve people. So if I have cherry tomatoes around, I know I can make that pasta. I know I can, dump them on top of some hummus. I know I can put them on a plate of labneh. I know I could take some stale bread and fry it in some olive oil in a pan and then, throw some cherry tomatoes and roasted garlic cloves on top of it. And it's like a beautiful hors d'oeuvre. So those are the kind of things that I like to have around that just make me feel like I could entertain at a moment's notice. And, Israel has really unwound my idea of entertaining. I feel like we all grew up in the United States. The house has to be clean. Everything has to be ready. Everything needs to be all lined up. The kitchen has to be spotless. In Israel, it's not like that. People come over, you sort of cook and hang out. You ask people to help you finish the dish, and the kind of food that I make, I think, lends itself to that kind of entertaining. If you click on slide 26, this is a classic herb stall in Shuka Carmel, run by a lovely Arab family. And, one of my favorite herbs, you see there's a sign that says irit. I don't know if you can point to that, Sarah, but irit are chives.
Can you see my cursor there?
So irit are chives. And, as someone who lived in New York City for 20 years, for me, chives were one of the saddest culinary gambits there were. You'd always get like 6 chives that were kind of bent over in this clamshell and were already sort of like half rotten by the time you got them. In Israel, the chive bunch is as thick as the scallion bunch, and it costs about $1. And, I just took me a while to realize that I could just use them with abandon however I want to. And I'm just constantly buying fresh herbs. I find that they've really become almost like a star player in my food. Like I'll just chop so many more scallion greens into my food. I'll use a ton of arugula or mint, or, you know, every day I make a mint tea with some turmeric or ginger in it, and then if I juiced a lemon, I'll throw the rind into the teapot. You know, all these different things. It's kind of this ecosystem based around all the produce and cuisine and stuff that I use every day. And, you know, when a bunch of mint costs 75 cents, you just, and it's like, you know, a huge bunch, you feel free to sort of improvise and enjoy. So that's just one of the things I really love. And, you know, most of these herbs are available all year, but it is fun still. You know, one of the things I love about the seasonality of Israeli food is, you know, when that avocado does come into season, or that lime is in the market for its elusive short season, or blueberries, you really prize it and are excited about it. You know, when's the last time you were excited about a strawberry in the United States? You know, we get them all the time. And here, like, and the same is true of lemon verbena, which is one of my favorite herbs. You know, it only thrives in really strong sunlight, so it's only around in the summer. So I always make sure to ask for it and put it in my tea or in my bath, like whenever I can find it. And, you know, just all of the treasures of the shuk are what really inspire me every day and inspire my cooking every day, essentially. If you want to show slide 18.
Okay, and then I have a couple more questions.
Sure. So I think this.
Let's just go to 18. Hold on.
So I grew up in California and I love Mexican food, and one of my favorite Mexican dishes is elote, which is, you know, Mexican street corn, where they brush the grilled corn with mayonnaise, and then they roll it in cotija cheese, which is like a crumbly Mexican cheese, and then they put some cayenne pepper on it. So I decided to make a Middle Eastern street corn. So instead of mayonnaise, I brush labneh on the corn and I roll it in feta cheese, and I sprinkle za'atar and fresh chilies on it and cilantro. And it's like a lot of my dishes, it looks familiar but tastes completely different than what you're used to. And I love that sort of element of surprise, you know, because I still have a lot of my American upbringing in me, and I'm really proud of where I came from. And I love, you know, bringing the American kitchen, or the food that I grew up loving, into the Israeli kitchen. And I think this street corn, which you can also make into a salad just by cutting the corn off the cob, or using canned corn or frozen corn with those flavors, like really just is something easy and fun and very different.
So one of the questions that I was asked privately, but I think it's relevant for everybody, is that if they want to invite you to come to the JCC, how should they do that?
You can write me. Just write me at adina@adinasussman.com.
Okay, I will share with everybody your email.
I'm not doing the Jewish Book Council this year, but I'm still organizing a tour. I have a speaking agent who's helping me arrange appearances, so I would love to come.
Do you have any dates in mind?
Well, I was going to be coming in May, but I think at this point, probably the fall. I'll do, and I think that's probably a good time for you guys. I know that programming is very sort of tenuous right now, but I don't know even if the summer is a good time for JCCs. I know a lot of people are just away and vacationing. So I think a safe bet would be like right after the holidays, or, you know, like I'm planning sort of a trip in the States, like October, November, basically.
Great. You mentioned earlier that you're going to put a couple of recipes on your website. And
Yes.
Somebody asked, could they take them from the website and put them on their own social media, together with an interview you did about unorthodox or something?
Sure. Please just credit. Sarah, I'll send you the language for the credit for the photographs and the recipes. And yeah, sure.
So this is also a time that Adina was very generous before they made the decision, maybe, or at the same time as putting some of these recipes out there, in giving this group a challenge. And she's given us a recipe. Well, Adina, tell us what you're sharing with this group, or what I will share tomorrow with this group.
So we thought we would go with something that you could make for Shabbat or Passover. It's a za'atar roasted chicken over sumac roasted potatoes. And it's just like a real showstopper. You make a rub with za'atar and lemon zest and garlic, and you rub it all over the chicken. You can leave the chicken whole if you want. You can also do it in pieces. And then you toss the potatoes in sumac, which is kind of tart, and olive oil, and then you put the chicken on top of the potatoes and roast it in the oven, and it's kind of a one dish meal. It's been very popular. That sort of really savory flavor of the za'atar, it just really works well with chicken. And again, and one of those things where Israelis are shocked, like I think a lot of us have seen a za'atar chicken recipe at this point, but Israelis still haven't, and they're still kind of disoriented by that idea. So that's fun, but that's a good one. If you're a vegetarian or a pescatarian, you could definitely put the za'atar rub on fish or on vegetables, would work really well, I think, on a cauliflower or anything. So yeah, so enjoy.
So thank you. So somebody wrote, I made both of those and they're delicious.
Thank you.
So the challenge will be that we're going to ask everybody, whoever decides that they're able to make this, and of course Adina makes it seem so simple, that you take a picture and you share it with us, and we'll get it out there and have lots of JCC folk making the same meal. And suggestions as to where to possibly order za'atar and sumac through an online purveyor in the US.
Sure. So
or somewhere in Ohio. The question was.
Sure. So there is, if you happen to buy Sababa, there is a shopping guide in the back that gives you all of the different resources. But for spices specifically, there's a company called New York Shuk, which is nyshuk.com. And it's a couple who are friends of mine, Ron and Lital Arazi, based in Brooklyn. And they make za'atar and hawaj for soup, and harissa and preserved lemon paste, and all the things that you could possibly need. Pereg, which is an Israeli company that now has a large American presence, Pereg. You can find their spices at almost kosher stores, Middle Eastern stores, online, on Amazon. Penzeys Spices, which is a large chain of spice stores that also sells online, Penzey. And then there's a wonderful store in Seattle called World Spice that ships, that has all of these spices. They're much easier to find than they could be, especially online. Same goes for
So the last couple of comments, and then we're going to wrap up, was saying, thank you, this was wonderful. I can't wait to share this session with our homebound community members. And I think that's just wonderful. That's our dream. And somebody just wrote, just ordered Sababa from Amazon. It won't be delivered until April the 22nd.
Really?
Well, anyway, but at least you'll have a couple of recipes to get yourself going. So go onto Adina's website, Adina Sussman.
Please write me if you guys, write me online, send me emails, ask me questions, write me on Instagram, please let me know how it's going. Check out those free recipes. Also, if you just, on book tour throughout the fall, there was a lot of press about the book, and a lot of recipes were published online, and a lot of the recipes are on my website, just in the press page. So if you click through there, you might find some more recipes to try if you're not in a position to order the book or the book is delayed. There's a lot out there from Sababa. The tahini blondies are probably the single most popular recipe from the book, and you can definitely find the recipe online. They take 5 minutes to make, and if you don't have tahina, you can use peanut butter. They're pretty killer, I have to say. So enjoy them.
I'm going for that one. So Adina, I really want to say a huge thank you. It's been very therapeutic. I'm starving hungry, and I'm going to be one of these people who's just going to turn up at your door, as you say people do when we're allowed out. I want to
see you at JCC. Is I really enjoy. I'll do cooking demonstrations or talks or a combination. A lot of JCCs hired a caterer to do like a lunch or a brunch with recipes from the book that accompanied a talk or a demonstration, and that worked really well. So just
fabulous. So when I sent out the invitation to the Zoom, and you may still have it somewhere, we also put together a booklet, The Taste of Israel, and at the back of the booklet there's a whole about 2 pages of like programming ideas about using food as a way of bringing Israel into your JCC. I know we're not there at the moment, and you guys have so many other priorities you're dealing with, connecting to your members. But food becomes a very emotional and a very special thing, and especially as we're leading up to Passover, to Pesach. And it, as somebody wrote here, we can share some of these things and some of these ideas with our members online even, and we're doing great things. Thank you for your time. Stay well, everybody. Listen to the instructions, and let's try not to eat too much chocolate while we're stuck at home.
Bye, everyone. It was an honor.
Thank you very much.
Bye.